There's one line in the most recent page of Rage and Enlightenment, my comic about the Industrial Revolution as lived by insects in a dung-finding economy, that might seem hyperbolic or overly harsh. So the magistrate says, they have a point. You're not exactly following the law here. What do you expect me to do? And Murdock responds, I expect you to keep up your side of our agreement, and you can expect me to make you a wealthy man. I expect them to buy my cheap product or lay down in the nearest ditch and die. I don't care which. Calm this crowd or I will. And then magistrate says, people, I know progress can be scary, but you're fighting the inevitable. You can't fight progress. Anyway, this dialogue is coming from a lot of different places and a lot of different experiences that I've read about and experienced myself. But I wanted to point out a couple of things. When the crowd here is shouting about anti-competitive practices and unfair labor practices and competition, those types of things, a free market works on people being able to be competitive. And we've decided in America after the 20s and 30s that we shouldn't have robber barons. We shouldn't have people that are more powerful than the government. And we shouldn't allow people that are more powerful to crush their competitors or purchase their competitors or own every purchasing power in a specific segment or all of the selling power in a specific segment, because that destroys competition, which destroys capitalism. And anyway, so they're not exactly following the law here. And the Luddites did the same thing. They went to the government and they said, hey, we've got laws in the books that say that this isn't okay. And instead of the government following the laws, they hanged the Luddites. They killed them. They sent the military against them. They ignored them. They let them starve and didn't enforce the laws that were already in the books, which is kind of what's happening now. We've got laws in the books that say that we shouldn't have these giant monopolies, monopsonies, and duopolies. They're anti-competitive practices, and we say that we shouldn't have that. Now, this part that Murdock says, I expect them to lay down in the nearest ditch and die, I don't care which, that's actually coming from a book. And that book is The Risings of the Luddites. And I'm going to read a section of that because I find it really interesting. And it's written kind of in an older style of English, but you can hear the sarcasm, satire is palpable. So here's an excerpt from The Risings of the Luddites. Manufacturers everywhere were availing themselves of the many wonderful inventions that were being brought out for cheapening labor. And as the new machinery threw thousands out of employment when extensively introduced, the poor, misguided wretches who could not understand how that could be a benefit which deprived them of the means of earning a livelihood and reduced them to beggary, met in secret conclaves and resolved in their ignorance to destroy them. Had they been better instructed, they would have known that it was their duty to lie down in the nearest ditch and die. The schoolmaster was not abroad in those days, or they might have read how the British soldiers climbed upon the bloody walls of Badajoz and impaled themselves upon the gleaming spikes at the top until their bodies were piled high enough to cover the cruel blades, and their comrades could safely creep over them to victory. They had not probably read of this, or they might have learned from it that it was their duty to lie down quietly and suffer themselves to be crushed out of existence by the advancing and unpitying wheels of the juggernaut of trade, in order that the march of progress might not be delayed or obstructed. Had these deluded men studied Malthus, they would have at once discovered that they were indeed altogether in the wrong in seeking to cumber the earth with their presence, when they were clearly not wanted, for that great political economist plainly told them that a man who is born into the world already possessed, or if a society does not want his labor, has no claim or right to the smallest portion of food, and in fact has no business to be where he is. At nature's mightiest feast, there is no cover for him. These men, however, clearly knew nothing of political economy, and had probably never heard of Malthus, much less read his famous pamphlet. And being able and willing to work, and seeing plenty around them, they could not understand that it was their duty to perish of starvation. Therefore, as we have already said, they resolved to destroy the machines which took away their daily bread, and before the movement could be suppressed, before then 1,000 lace and stocking frames were destroyed. Anyway, that just stands out to me because one of the things that I find really interesting is the modern day use of the term Luddite means somebody who is scared of technology or doesn't know how to use technology. You think of like, a grandparent just sitting there just terrified of a smartphone. In actuality, that has nothing to do with the actual Luddites. They looked around and saw that everybody was eating well and didn't realize that it was their job to sacrifice themselves and starve to death and die in a ditch so that somebody else could be made rich by unethically developing technology in a way that wasn't for the greater good of society or the quality of the product. It was selfishly done with regulatory capture, bought off government employees and lords of land and industrialists who were doing anything that they possibly could to be rich. And I think human life is more important than wealth. I think we often look at rebellion and it's like, why are they doing that? Why are they whatever? And it's like the alternative in a lot of instances is starvation and death. What we're asking these people who are being replaced and automated unethically and illegally in many cases, especially with the Luddites. The courts are still kind of going through this, but AI as well. We're asking them to lay down in the nearest ditch and die. And instead of that, many people will break machines. And so we'll see what happens in the comic. Stay tuned. I'm hoping to not have my characters be cartoonish villains, but also there are some very real examples in history of people doing incredibly cruel things and then saying, are you scared of progress? You can't fight the inevitable. This is happening and you can't stop it. Anyway, tear down concentrated power and go make stuff.